All right, welcome back to RETCON. I hope you're having an awesome time so far. Our next speaker is Hadley Arnold. She is the CEO at DiviningLAB, Water, Risk, and Resilience Analytics. Please join me in welcoming Hadley to our virtual stage.
Thank you for having me. I'm Hadley Arnold. I'm here from DiviningLAB in Los Angeles. We deliver AI-driven flood risk analytics to a water-stressed world. As the conference organizers recognize and bring us all together, the real estate industry is undergoing a fundamental shift toward a technology-enabled and data-driven future. Growing physical risks of climate change complicate property-related decision-making from due diligence through lending and insuring to operations, maintenance, and emergency management. For decision makers managing risk and ROI, whether in ownership, operations, AEC, real estate finance, or property insurance, urban flooding presents particular challenges. Traditionally, predictive flood models tell your team the likelihood or probability of a flood occurring on your property. Typically, a FEMA flood map describes the likelihood of your property facing, for example, a 100-year storm. And while that's important, it's no longer enough. What a predictive model cannot tell you is how will water at any given storm intensity behave when it hits your property, with what impacts and what projected costs. Our models are different. They give you the information you need to stress test your assets, to digitally dump water on your property and its surroundings under a range of scenarios and get the information you need. So a little bit about the challenge, a little bit about the technology, and a quick look at several use cases in commercial real estate, how new modeling techniques can make a difference managing risk in your portfolio. First of all, a changing hydrologic sphere is the single largest manifestation of a changing climate. Catastrophic urban flooding is now seen as a $1 trillion global threat. Larger rain events result in larger losses. In 2017, just one storm, Harvey, hit Houston so hard it knocked 85% or $3.25 billion off one global reinsurer's net profits. That wasn't wind and it wasn't storm surge. Why the unanticipated losses? Because a second challenge compounds the first, not just larger storm events, but data gaps and outdated modeling methods. In a nutshell, rain-based flooding is poorly modeled. To break it down, most predictive flood models focus on three types of flooding: coastal storm surge, fluvial or river-based flooding, and sea level rise. Important, but they leave out the most costly form of flooding and the hardest flooding to model: rain-based flooding, city rain, also known as inland flooding, overland flows, pluvial flood. Storms like Harvey are delivering their costliest damages through intensive downpours. Flood modeling hasn't kept up. As Wharton's Institute for Urban Research notes, risk modeling companies have modeled hurricane, wind, and storm surge related flooding for decades. These models are well developed and have now been calibrated against many events. Development of US inland flood modeling, urban rain, however, is in its nascent stages. One of the fundamental challenges of the modeling process is that flood risk can be especially sensitive to individual structural characteristics and location. For instance, a small difference in elevation of a couple of feet can cause large variations in flood damage. The ability to synthesize rapidly data on impervious surface areas, localized stormwater drainage infrastructure at a fine geographic scale, and incorporate it with specific attributes of buildings were not available when that report was published in 2018. They're available now. Meet Hazel. Urban rain is the climate challenge and risk modeling gap DiviningLAB addresses, and our tool is called Hazel. Hazel Flood for cities in humid environments, Hazel Dry for cities interested in capturing and storing rain for water supply. Hazel Flood focuses on the risk of rainfall at a fine scale, sensitive to slope, surface materials, and structural details of individual buildings in the context of large, complex urban stormwater and flood control systems. Our founders draw on a combined 40 years of expertise in climate adaptation and design of the built environment. We build on our backgrounds in design to model pluvial flooding and its behavior on urban surfaces better than it has ever been modeled. We are solution-driven and city real. Another differentiator to emphasize is that Hazel Flood is not just rain-based, it's certain. What do we mean by that? It's a deterministic, not a probabilistic model. It describes physics, not statistics. What does that mean and who cares? Why is determinism important to commercial real estate? Commercial real estate. Traditional flood models describe risk in zones or in plan, one-dimensionally. But this doesn't provide a true physical description of water's interaction with the built environment. Traditional models provide a graphic coding, a characterization of your property. To paraphrase the Wharton team, a coding or boundary area around a flood zone creates two false perceptions. One, that inside the special flood hazard area, risk is uniform. And two, that outside the boundary, people and properties are safe. Neither is the case. In reality, flood risk varies continuously across landscapes impacted by even slight changes in elevation. The difference, Hazel Flood's full 2D hydrodynamic modeling is not a graphic shorthand of approximated risk. It is the full physical description of difficult to model shallow water equations. In other words, Hazel Flood is water real. What's the value of certainty, physical or deterministic modeling to the real estate industry? Let's look at several use cases. First, from a due diligence perspective, in large part, a physical process, inspecting not only building, but site and context. At an urban scale, upstream, meaning outside property boundaries and before site selection takes place, Hazel Flood can be used to look closely at a city's flood risk and flood preparedness. Cities and how water behaves on them change all the time. 42% of the urban land in the US will be redeveloped by 2030. Staying current and precise is crucial. In the case study on these images, traditional risk assessment methods on the left show 32 out of 244 parcels at risk in a 100-year flood event. On the right, Hazel Flood shows the true risk. 225 parcels out of 244 are at risk in the same flood event. Why does it matter? A city's physical and fiscal strength depend on smart emergency response, infrastructure repair, adaptive strategies, and economic development. Assess the cities you're looking at sites in. Hazel Flood can be used to assess complex urban watersheds inside and outside designated floodplain boundaries, providing pinpoint intelligence for effective mitigation before inundation occurs. That's of value for the private and the public sector. Hazel Flood provides actionable intel for strategic deployment of limited budgets, whether that's for green infrastructure investment or emergency management and flood control. At the scale of an individual property, Hazel Flood models water's actual behavior at any given storm intensity and duration. It's designed for stress testing. It can tell you where are this property's key physical vulnerabilities, how will the property perform under a range of flood levels. Hazel Flood simulates on the left a Houston apartment complex, a real formerly existing Houston apartment complex, vulnerable to significant flooding, although the FEMA floodplain maps did not say so. Following repeated flooding in 2015 and 2017, the apartment complex above right had to be demolished in 2019. poorly understood risk is expensive. From a building management perspective, how will your tenants be impacted? How will your supply chains be impacted? How will you know where to invest in prevention measures or where not to? In these slides, it makes it very clear that even the most subtle changes in landscape have a large impact on where it is that you would invest a limited budget in mitigating flooding on a commercial retail center, in this case in Houston. From a loss and damage prevention perspective, where is it wisest to invest proactively in measures that might deflect, buffer, absorb, or redirect flows? If you knew that, what measures would you take? And what are the implications for negotiating with your lenders, with your underwriters, or after an event in claims settlement? Hyper-precise, fast, and certain scenario-based stress testing reveals where and where not to invest strategically, from scoping to due diligence, from design and construction through operation, maintenance, and management. We'd like to support your best work and your smartest flood risk decisions. Please drop us a line. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us, Hadley. These are amazing things that you're doing, and we're so excited, and we're giving you a big virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
All right. If you're looking for your next session, you can go ahead and check out your agenda to see where you're going next, or take some time to connect with your peers one-on-one with some virtual networking. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.